Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, December 11, 2024. Secretary of State Antony Blinken gives long-awaited testimony before the House Foreign Affairs Committee on the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, saying, even as we work to address the places where we fell short, I firmly believe President Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan was the right one. American troops are no longer fighting and dying in Afghanistan. The American people are safer and more secure. The committee chair, Republican Michael McCaul, calls the withdrawal a catastrophic event that was the beginning of a failed foreign policy that lit the world on fire. House today passes the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, for Pentagon programs and policy in fiscal year 2025 after a contentious debate over a ban on the military's health care program covering some care for transgender children of service members. Pete Hegseth, the President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for Defense Secretary, continues meeting with Republican senators who may be on the fence about voting for him. Today it was with Senator Susan Collins of Maine. FBI Director Christopher Wray announces he'll resign in January with 3 years left on his 10-year term. That avoids the need for President-elect Donald Trump to fire him, and he said he would, and it would make way for his FBI Director nominee, Kash Patel. U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger testifies before the Senate Rules and Administration Committee about Member of Congress safety and also security next month with presidential inaugural events. And President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden host the first ever White House Conference on Advancing Women's Health Research. Story from Associated Press. Secretary of State Antony Blinken testified Wednesday before the House Foreign Affairs Committee, facing questions for the last time about some of the darkest moments of Joe Biden's presidency, U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The hearing comes at the twilight of Blinken's diplomatic career, with only weeks left before President-elect Donald Trump takes office, at the end of the chairmanship of Congressman Michael McCaul, who will no longer lead the committee in the next Congress. It's the capstone to nearly 4 years of animosity between the two men over the end of America's longest war. That was from Associated Press. Secretary Blinken had barely gotten started on his opening statement when a protester in the audience interrupted.
First of all, let me just say I have very much appreciated working with you these past 4 years, working with the ranking member. I think we've done good and important things together.
Antony Blinken, Secretary of Genocide, Butcher of Rasta.
Remind the audience members, disruption of committee proceedings is against the law. Holding up signs or making verbal outbursts during the proceedings is disruptive and will not be tolerated.
There were a few more such protests during that opening statement. In each case, the protester was escorted out of the hearing room by the Capitol Police. Secretary Blinken then turned to the families of U.S. service members killed during the withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021 and apologized.
As I said, our thoughts are with all of the Gold Star families. They're with the State Department and USAID employees who lost their lives over the course of 20 years of our military involvement in Afghanistan. And I think today especially of the 13 heroes that we lost at Abbey Gate. And I deeply regret that we did not do more and could not do more to protect them. And to those families who are here with us today, you're in my thoughts, in my prayers. I wish that McCaul was here with us today. I'm deeply sorry that she's not.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He also, in his opening statement, pointed to the withdrawal agreement that former President Donald Trump negotiated with the Taliban, saying to the extent President Biden faced a choice, it was between ending the war or escalating it. He said, had he not followed through on his predecessor's commitment, attacks on our forces and allies would have resumed, and the Taliban's assault on the country's major cities would have commenced. Committee Chair Michael McCaul, though, said this catastrophic event was the beginning of a failed foreign policy that lit the world on fire. Here's part of the exchange between the two.
You left weapons behind to the Taliban, classified documents to the Taliban. You left behind embassy employees to the Taliban. And now 3 years later, your own IG, Inspector General, concluded that your State Department has been unwilling and unable to learn from its mistakes. My question is, have you read the IG report and have you held your own State Department accountable?
Mr. Chairman, first, with regard to the documents, we have in place at every embassy, including in Afghanistan, a process by which sensitive documents are destroyed in the event of an evacuation and shutting down the embassy. We began that process on August the 1st. And then when we got to August the 12th, before the collapse of Kabul, we proceeded with the emergency destruction of all of the remaining sensitive documents. And that process was complete by the 14th, a day before Kabul fell. That's a process that we engage in wherever we have an emergency, and that's exactly
Well, reclaim my time. I mean, the fact is, they should have been evacuated long before. I mean, you were still negotiating as the Taliban entered Kabul. The embassy should have been, as the military advised you to do, evacuate that embassy. Let me ask you this. When President Biden announced his unconditional surrender to the Taliban on April the 14th, 2021, you demanded that Embassy Kabul remain open, no matter what the cost. Your personnel opposed that. In fact, they did so in a cable dissent that we were able to get from you in our discovery process, a cry for help. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the CENTCOM commander, Millie McKenzie, said this was a fundamental mistake, a fatal flaw, and their biggest regret is keeping the embassy open despite the advice of your own people on the ground and military advisors. Why did you do that?
Very simply, because no one anticipated that the government and the Afghan armed forces would collapse as quickly as they did. We anticipated, and every intelligence assessment that we had anticipated, that Kabul would remain in the hands of the government and the hands of the Afghan armed forces through the balance of the year and into the next year.
My time because I want to say.
Let me finish.
I will let you finish.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, said, "Nothing I or anyone else saw indicated a collapse of the army or the government in 11 days. The DNI, Avril Haines, said, in the days leading up to the Taliban takeover, intelligence agencies did not see collapse as imminent. This unfolded more quickly than they anticipated, including in the intelligence community." Okay,
reclaim my time. I hear what you're saying, that no one saw the collapse coming. However, I've read the dissent cable, your embassy personnel, that you provided to me, that they sent to you in July before the collapse in 2021, warning of Afghanistan's imminent collapse, fearing for their safety. You personally read this, sir, and cleared it. Your Deputy Secretary, Brian McKeon, testified before this committee that you took no step to answer the cries for help. And as you know, as Secretary of State, you have a responsibility to protect Americans and diplomats.
Congressman Michael McCaul, Republican of Texas, Foreign Affairs Committee Chair, questioning Secretary of State Antony Blinken at today's hearing. Congressman Gerald Connolly, Democrat from Virginia, used his time for questions to talk about the Doha Agreement for U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan negotiated under former President Trump.
I'd like to put a picture up which seems to suggest, Mr. Secretary, that the Republican narrative is correct about you. There you are with a prominent Taliban negotiator. Do our tech people have that picture? Well, I have it here. Isn't that you with the Taliban negotiator, Mr. Secretary?
I'm afraid I can't see the picture, but I'm not aware of having spent any time with a Taliban negotiator.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's Secretary Pompeo. Was he your predecessor in the Biden administration as Secretary of State? In the Biden administration?
No, he was my predecessor in the previous administration, the Trump administration.
The Trump administration. And there he is in Doha with the chief Taliban negotiator. I guess I got that wrong. Well, Mr. Secretary, all things seem to flow from Doha. Secretary Pompeo and President Trump appointed a chief negotiator on behalf of the United States for the negotiations in Doha. What was his name?
Zal Khalilzad.
Ambassador Khalilzad. And he, of course, testified before this committee. And I can remember an exchange with him in which I expressed deep concern about the direction of the U.S. posture and the ramifications with allied Afghans who would work for us or work with us, and women. And he kind of brushed them off at the time. Tell us about the details of the agreement he forged in Doha. What were the chief elements of that? Concisely, if you would.
Yeah, in essence, the agreement provided for this. It provided that the Taliban would not use Afghan soil to attack us or our interests.
Right. No.
It would start an intra-Afghan negotiation, and as part of that negotiation, there would be discussion of a ceasefire and a political roadmap for the future of Afghanistan. And during the time between the agreement and the commitment that we made as part of the agreement to leave Afghanistan by May 31st.
So as a firm date was set
Yes.
for all U.S. troops to get out. Is that
correct? All U.S.
correct?
troops were to be out by May 31st. In the meantime, 5,000 prisoners were released from Taliban prisoners.
And as Mr. Sherman points out, among those 5,000 were terrorists, fighters, and people who returned to the battlefield against the Afghan government, which allegedly we were supporting at the time. Now, speaking of that Afghan government, were they in Doha at the negotiating table as equal partners?
They were not.
They were not?
They were not.
Why were they excluded? That's the government we were supporting.
I can't answer that. I wasn't there at the time, but they were not.
Well, if the government we're supporting is not allowed to have a voice at the peace negotiations where a deal was in fact agreed to by the United States, could that conceivably undermine confidence in that government and by that government in itself in terms of its future?
Yes, and indeed, I think General McKenzie has testified to exactly that point, that Doha created a tremendous crisis in confidence and about the future for the Afghan government and presumably to some extent for the Afghan security forces themselves.
Congressman Gerald Connolly, Democrat from Virginia, questioning Secretary of State Antony Blinken before the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The full hearing was covered live on C-SPAN and runs a little over 4 hours. You can find the video archived at our video library, cspan.org. An article from the National Desk reads, Secretary Blinken's testimony comes after years of contention between the State Department and the committee over documents, interviews, and other disagreements over lawmakers' investigation into the withdrawal. Despite receiving over 20,000 pages of records and multiple interviews with State Department staff, some of which came via subpoena, the committee was frequently at odds with Secretary Blinken and the department. It culminated in a party-line vote earlier this year to hold Blinken in contempt for failing to appear to testify before the committee. That is yet to be taken up in a full House vote. That was from the National Desk. The House today passed the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, for fiscal year 2025 by a vote of 280 to 140. A CQ fact sheet reads, the agreement authorizes $883.7 billion in discretionary spending equal to the president's request and 1% more than the fiscal year 2024 bill and consistent with the cap on defense spending set by last year's debt limit law, including $849.9 billion for the Defense Department, $33.2 billion for the Energy Department, nuclear weapon and related activities. Compared to the president's request, it authorizes less for military operations and maintenance, but more for military personnel, procurement, and research and development. It provides a 4.5% military pay raise with a higher 14.5% pay increase for junior enlisted personnel. Some of the fact sheet from Congressional Quarterly. An article in The Hill has this: the annual process for passing the NDAA is typically a bipartisan affair, attracting a broad swath of members from both parties. But the debate has been complicated this year by the inclusion of a Republican provision banning TRICARE, the military's health program, from covering some gender-affirming care for transgender children of service members. Here's some of the floor debate, starting with Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican of Alabama, chair of the Armed Services Committee.
For the first time in decades, this year's defense bill carries a different name. It's the Service Member Quality of Life Improvement and National Defense Authorization Act. We did that to underscore the tremendous gains this bill makes toward improving the quality of life of our service members and their families. No service member should have to live in squalid conditions. No military family should have to rely on food stamps to feed their children. And no one serving in the military should have to wait to see a doctor. But that's exactly what many of our service members are experiencing, especially junior enlisted personnel. This bill goes a long way to fixing that. It includes a 15% pay raise for the junior enlisted. It expands allowances for housing and food. The bill significantly increases funding to improve existing barracks and build new ones. It encourages the services to pursue public-private partnerships to provide better unaccompanied housing. The bill reduces dangerous health care wait times by waiving referral requirements for specialty care and expanding the number of DoD doctors and nurses with new special recruitment and pay incentives. The bill improves access to child care for military families by increasing investment in DoD child care centers and fully funding child care fee assistance programs. The bill helps military spouses gain and retain employment by making it easier for them to transfer professional licenses between states. We are making these historic improvements in the quality of life of our service members because now, more than ever, we need to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. That's because the threats our nation faces, especially those from China, are more complex now than they have been in over 40 years.
Congressman Mike Rogers, Republican from Alabama, chair of the Armed Services Committee. Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington State, the committee's ranking member, did praise the provisions dealing with service member quality of life included in the bill, but mentioned that provision on care for transgender children.
A political partisan wedge issue was insisted on being included in this bill at the insistence of Republican leadership, not of the Armed Services Committee. And I think it's really problematic. The language seems somewhat benign. It basically says that minors experiencing gender dysphoria will not be allowed to receive any care that could lead to sterilization. And the problem is this is denying health care to minors who clearly need it. And the could language is very problematic because, as we all know, anyone who's watched the last 15 seconds of any pharmaceutical ad, if you take any medical treatment, a lot of bad things could happen. And the medical profession is always very careful about explaining all of those things to you. This could restrict the ability of minors experiencing gender dysphoria, access to puberty blockers, access to hormone treatment therapy, access to critical care that they need. And for no good reason. Now look, there is a reasonable question about what care should minors receive in this area. And we had floated the idea that if you want to look at this, if you want to ask the medical profession, what do you think? You know, what did the studies tell you about when this care is appropriate? But we didn't do that. We have an outright ban on care that undoubtedly is saving lives of minors experiencing gender dysphoria and the anxiety and depression and suicidal thoughts that come with that.
Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington State, ranking member on the Armed Services Committee on the House floor today during debate on the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA. It did pass with that provision that he was talking about. Final vote, 280 to 140. Mostly party line, but 81 Democrats did vote yes. 16 Republicans voted no. The bill now goes to the Senate, expected to take it up and vote on it next week. Story from ABC News. President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met on Wednesday with another moderate Republican whose vote will be closely watched in his confirmation battle. Hegseth sat down with Maine Senator Susan Collins as he continues to make the rounds to shore up support amid allegations of sexual impropriety and other misconduct, which he denies. That was the article from ABC News. After the two met, they both spoke to reporters. First, Senator Collins.
So, Senator, what do you think? Is Pete Hegseth someone you can support?
Well, first, let me say that I had a good, substantive discussion that lasted more than an hour. We covered a wide range of topics, ranging from defense procurement reforms to the role of women in the military, sexual assault in the military, Ukraine, NATO, a wide range of issues. I obviously always wait until we have an FBI background check, and one is underway in the case of Mr. Hegseth, and I wait to see the committee hearing before reaching a final decision.
What is your level of skepticism? What is your level of skepticism about him? Can you just, even if you might vote for him, what is your skepticism?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you mean.
I mean, are there problems with military, sexual assault? Are there problems with his positions on Ukraine? Where are the areas that you think are the problem areas?
Well, we had a good discussion. I'm not going to go into every question I asked, although I asked virtually every question under the sun.
So did you press him on the allegations against him?
I pressed him on both his position on military issues as well as the allegations against him. So I don't think there was anything that we did not cover.
Did you ask him specifically about his stance about women in combat?
We got to get to the vote. Did he clarify? Thank you guys so much.
Yes.
Did you clarify?
And what did he say about that?
Thank you. What did he say? Thank you so much.
Do you have plans for another meeting?
We got to go, you guys. There's a vote on. Thank you.
Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine, meeting with reporters after meeting with Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary nominee from President-elect Donald Trump. Hegseth, too, spoke to reporters for a minute.
Thank you very much. How do you characterize this meeting compared to some of the others? It was a great meeting. Having an immense amount of respect. Thank you. Sorry, very much. It was a great meeting with Senator Collins. And again, at office after office, having the opportunity to spend time with these senators who have invested their careers in ensuring that our warfighters get what they need has been an amazing educational process. And Senator Collins, like her colleagues before her, reiterated that. And it was a wonderful conversation. We focused on what needs to be done to make sure this Pentagon is focused on warfighting and lethality. And we look forward to staying in touch with her.
Now, she's going to be the chair of the Appropriations Committee.
I'm certainly not going to assume anything about where the senator stands. This is a process that we respect and appreciate, and we hope through time, overall, when we get through that committee and to the floor, that we can earn her support. But it's about earning support in this process in ongoing conversations, and we're doing this for the warfighters, and I'm grateful the President.
Pete Hegseth, nominated for Defense Secretary in the upcoming Trump presidential administration, meeting with reporters after meeting with Senator Susan Collins, Republican of Maine. Story from the Washington Post. FBI Director Christopher A. Wray announced he would resign from his position at the end of the Biden administration, stepping down as the leader of the 35,000-person law enforcement bureau before President-elect Donald Trump takes office and can fire him. Wray's resignation comes 7 years into his 10-year term, a tenure that is meant to span multiple administrations and is intentionally longer than other executive branch appointments to avoid politicization of the FBI. Trump announced last month that he would nominate loyalist Kash Patel to serve as FBI director, sending a message to Wray that he should either resign or prepare to be fired. Washington Post article continues. Wray announced his plans at a town hall with the FBI workforce on Wednesday afternoon, telling his employees that while it was a hard decision to cut his term short, he believed it was the best one for the Bureau. According to excerpts released by the FBI, he said, "My goal is to keep the focus on our mission, the indispensable work you're doing on behalf of the American people every day. In my view, this is the best way to avoid dragging the Bureau deeper into the fray while reinforcing the values and principles that are so important to how we do our work. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. This is not easy for me. I love this place. I love our mission, and I love our people. But my focus is and always has been on us and doing what's right for the FBI." A quote from Christopher Wray at a town hall meeting today with staff, as reported by the Washington Post. Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, spoke to reporters today after meeting with President-elect Donald Trump's nominee for CIA Director, John Ratcliffe. Senator Cornyn was also asked about the FBI Director nominee from President-elect Trump, Kash Patel.
Senator, how did the meeting go in there with John Ratcliffe?
Well, it went well. I've known John Ratcliffe for a number of years, even before he came to Congress, and of course worked with him as part of the Texas delegation. I had the honor of introducing him at his previous nomination for Director of National Intelligence. So I think that's an outstanding pick by President Trump.
Do you have any concerns about Ratcliffe?
I don't. I think he's going to be one of the more boring confirmation hearings that we'll have, which I think is okay with him.
Who are some of the less boring?
Well, the ones that you all report on. I'm not going to name names, but you know who they are.
Kash Patel, the FBI director nominee, you said some of his calls to close down the FBI were, quote, hyperbole. Do you still believe that, or do you think some of these calls are concerning?
Well, you know, I've been around long enough to know that people grow into their new responsibilities, and that was really the focus of my question for Kash Patel. How much of this was rhetoric or hyperbole, and how much of it is reality? Taking on the FBI, it's 37,000 people, is an almost insurmountable task. Fortunately, the problems have been primarily located here at the headquarters and not in the rank and file members. But I think Trey Gowdy, who worked with him on the House Intelligence Committee investigation of the Russiagate hoax, spoke very well of him and gives me some confidence that he'll be able to do that job as a professional. Same with Pam Bondi as the Attorney General. She's a career prosecutor. I want to make sure that we restore the reputation of these agencies, these departments like the FBI and the Department of Justice and the intelligence community, that we restore their reputation as non-political institutions. It's really important that they not be political institutions, and that's what I'm asking these nominees about, their commitment to doing just that.
Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, speaking to reporters. President-elect Donald Trump put out a lengthy post on his Truth Social account. The resignation of Christopher Wray is a great day for America, as it will end the weaponization of what has become known as the United States Department of Injustice. I just don't know what happened to him. We will now restore the rule of law for all Americans. Under the leadership of Christopher Wray, the FBI illegally raided my home without cause, worked diligently on illegally impeaching and indicting me, and has done everything else to interfere with the success and future of America. They have used their vast powers to threaten and destroy many innocent Americans, some of which will never be able to recover from what has been done to them. Kash Patel is the most qualified nominee to lead the FBI in the agency's history and is committed to helping ensure that law, order, and justice will be brought back to our country again and soon, part of the statement from President-elect Donald Trump. Attorney General Merrick Garland putting out his own statement, and that reads in part, the director of the FBI is responsible for protecting the independence of the FBI from inappropriate influence in its criminal investigations. That independence is central to preserving the rule of law and to protecting the freedoms we as Americans hold dear. Director Wray has done that job with integrity and skill. He has my gratitude, the gratitude of the FBI agents and employees whose respect and admiration he has earned, and the gratitude of the American people. That was part of the statement from Attorney General Merrick Garland. Another of President-elect Donald Trump's nominations, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, a Republican, nominated for Homeland Security Secretary, spoke to reporters today after she met with Senator Gary Peters, Democrat of Michigan and chair of the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee.
So do you expect to get Democratic senators to vote for your confirmation? And how will you win them over?
You know, my hope is that I will get bipartisan support of my confirmation to become the next Department of Homeland Security Secretary. We've just had great conversations with Senator Peters, talked about some concerns within the agency, what we can do to solidify our national security interests. And I think Republicans and Democrats in this country recognize how important Homeland Security is, and that we're working together to make sure that we're safe and that we're thinking ahead as well. You know, if you look at the different entities that are within Homeland Security, it's not just the border and immigration, it's TSA, it's weapons of mass destruction, it's cybersecurity. So all of those have some good work that can be done together.
And one more, what are you hoping to hear from Democrats?
You know, that they're open to having a conversation on what we can do for America. You know, President Trump campaigned on making America great again, but also making America safe again. And so that's what the majority of our conversation has been. What policies have they been working on? What can we do to be helpful to follow through on what President Trump has promised?
Another quick one. Just there's some allegations from some CNN reporting out today, and I was wondering if you can respond to allegations that you neglected your state in order to boost your national profile.
You know, that is absolutely not true whatsoever. The CNN report left out some incredibly important information on the 1,000-year flood we had in South Dakota this last year, and our response to it immediately, days before the flood even came and hit the state. And so those families went through something extremely tragic, and we're continuing to work through the FEMA process to bring them all the resources that they need.
Thank you, Governor.
Governor Kristi Noem, Republican of South Dakota, nominated by President-elect Donald Trump to be Homeland Security Secretary. Speaking to reporters after meeting, Senator Gary Peters, Democrat from Michigan. Another Washington Post article, the Syrian rebel coalition that ousted Bashar al-Assad, led by the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, said Wednesday that it has further consolidated control over the country's east as it seeks to build a new political order in the country. Mohammed al-Bashir, who previously led the HTS-backed governing body in Syria's Idlib province, said he will serve as Syria's caretaker prime minister until March with the backing of the rebel coalition. Bashir told Al Jazeera it was time for stability and calm. That was from the Washington Post. The Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh was asked about Syria and the U.S. troops still stationed there. You'll also hear another question on a different issue. The unidentified drones seen flying near sensitive U.S. military sites in New Jersey.
Are U.S. forces still doing partnered operations with SDF? And how has all of the different changing dynamics in the North affected those operations?
So there's been no change to our partnership with the SDF when it comes to ensuring the defeat of ISIS. I don't have recent partnered raids to speak to, but you did see over the weekend Central Command take strikes against ISIS camps and leaders in the Badia Desert. But there's been no change to our work or partnership with SDF forces. We continue to work with them. General Kurilla, our Central Command commander, was actually in the region engaging with his counterparts. So that work remains ongoing. Jen.
Sabrina, can you tell me what the Pentagon is doing to address this issue of drone sightings over New Jersey? It's near sensitive installations. The FBI is involved. What is the Pentagon doing?
Sure. So at this time, aware of those drone sightings that have been reported, at this time we have no evidence that these activities are coming from a foreign entity or the work of an adversary. We're going to continue to monitor what is happening, but at no point were our installations threatened when this activity was occurring.
Can you rule out that these are American drones or U.S. military drones?
These are not U.S. military drones. Again, this is being investigated by local law enforcement. What our initial assessment here is that these are not drones or activities coming from a foreign entity or adversary.
Representative Jeff Van Drew, who is a Republican from New Jersey, was just on the air saying that Iran launched a mothership probably about a month ago that contains these drones, and that mothership is off the coast of the east coast of the United States. Is there any truth to that?
There is not any truth to that. There is no Iranian ship off the coast of the United States, and there's no so-called mothership launching drones towards the United States.
Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh at her news conference at the Pentagon. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Listening to programs on C-SPAN through C-SPAN Radio is easy. Tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio, and listen to Washington Journal daily at 7 a.m. Eastern. Important public affairs events throughout the day. And weekdays, catch Washington Today. Listen to C-SPAN anytime. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio. C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden, writes a Nexstar article, hosted the first ever White House conference on women's health research on Wednesday. The conference brought together researchers and advocates as well as policymakers to discuss ways to advance women's health research. Just over a year ago, the Biden administration announced the initiative to fund and invest in research for things like ovarian cancer, menopause, and high blood pressure in pregnant women. Over the past year, the First Lady has traveled across the country to meet with researchers, visit universities, and connect with leaders across industries to further the initiative. That was from Nexstar. Here's First Lady Jill Biden at the White House.
The United States has the best health research in the world. Yet women's health is understudied and research is underfunded, and so many of you have said this. And the United States economy loses $1.8 billion in working time every year to menopause symptoms that upend women's lives. And that's what Maria Shriver and I talked about on that Saturday afternoon in April last year. So Maria keeps this quote next to her phone. you have a stationary phone? In her office, and it says, why go to the moon? And your uncle, President Kennedy, asked, we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, because they are hard. So, Maria, thank you for carrying on that mission, pushing for breakthroughs that are never easy but possible. Thank you.
First Lady Jill Biden in the White House East Room at the first ever White House Conference on Advancing Women's Health Research. She was joined by President Joe Biden.
Across our administration and across Congress, across the country, the work we're doing on women's health research is some of the most important work this administration has ever done. And I've always believed that our nation is at its best when we plumb the endless possibilities that exist for all our women and girls. And that includes their health. Women are half our population, to state the obvious. But like Jill said, for too long they've been underrepresented when it comes to health research. And that's real. You know, that's why over a year ago, we launched the first ever White House initiative on women's health research. And the goal was to fundamentally change and improve how we approach and invest in women's health research. We weren't doing enough of it. And to pioneer the next generation of scientific research and discoveries that are going to improve care for women receive all across the country. Because the fact is, the health of our moms and grandmothers, sisters and daughters, friends and colleagues affects not just women's well-being, but the prosperity of the entire nation. And that's a fact. We haven't gotten that through to the other team yet. No, I mean it, across the board. Anyway, I won't get into it. But that's why in my State of the Union address this year, I called on Congress to invest $12 billion in women's health research to benefit millions of lives and families and communities all across America. Folks, but my administration wasn't going to wait for Congress to secure the funding. We looked for other ways to prioritize women's health with existing dollars that are already in the government and to get important work started. And I knew where to start. Rosa DeLauro. Rosa, stand up.
President Joe Biden at the White House at the first ever White House Conference on Advancing Women's Health Research, along with First Lady Jill Biden, referring to Rosa DeLauro, that's a Democrat Congresswoman from Connecticut. She is currently Appropriations Committee Chair and will become Ranking Democrat in the next Congress. Story from the Financial Times. U.S. inflation ticked up to 2.7% last month, matching Wall Street's forecast and clearing the way for an expected Federal Reserve rate cut next week. Wednesday's data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics was in line with the expectations of economists polled by Bloomberg, but it was higher than the 2.6% rate in October, which itself marked an increase on the previous month. That was from Financial Times. White House National Economic Advisor Lael Brainerd putting out a statement. For 4 months in a row now, inflation has been close to the level right before the pandemic. While price increases have been hard for working families, household incomes are up almost $4,000 more than prices during this administration. We will continue to fight to lower costs for American families. That was from White House National Economic Council Director Lael Brainerd. Senator John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, the current minority whip, and incoming majority leader, spoke today on the Senate floor about inflation and the Biden administration, and he referenced President Biden's economic legacy speech that he gave on Tuesday.
The president likes to pretend, as he did in his speech yesterday, that he came in and saved the economy after COVID. But the truth is, the economy was already well on its way to a healthy recovery. And his massive, ill-advised, supposed COVID relief legislation helped kick off an inflation crisis whose reverberations are still being felt today in family budgets around the country. President Biden can give all the speeches he wants touting his economic record, but his economy has been the very opposite of a boon to lower and middle-income families. Mr. President, the good news is that the days of President Biden's disastrous economic policies are numbered. In January, President Trump will take office, and Republicans will have control of the House and the Senate. And expanding economic opportunity, increasing growth, and Americans' wages will be a top priority. And that means taking action via reconciliation to preserve the tax relief that Republicans delivered during the first Trump administration. Tax relief that improved take-home pay for millions of hardworking Americans. It also means targeting onerous regulations choking our economy, like the 1,000-plus Biden-Harris regulations that have already cost Americans well over $1.5 trillion. And it means things like unleashing American energy and restoring American energy dominance, which will benefit both the economy and our national security. President Biden's energy policies have jeopardized the future of our already shaky electric grid and set us up for future supply problems. But his war on American energy ends next month, and a better future is in sight.
Senator John Thune, Republican from South Dakota, the incoming majority leader, speaking today on the Senate floor. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 99, NASDAQ up 347 to close at 20,034, passing the 20,000 mark for the first time. S&P up 49. Story from The Hill, the Senate on Wednesday blocked Lauren McFerrin's renomination to the National Labor Relations Board, opening the door for Republican control of the board starting next year under President-elect Trump. Senators voted 49 to 50 against a 5-year term for McFerrin, the NLRB's chair, with Senators Kyrsten Sinema, independent of Arizona, and Joe Manchin, independent from West Virginia, voting with every Senate Republican but one to block it. Senator Roger Marshall, Republican of Kansas, was the lone Republican who did not vote. Reconfirming McFerrin would have locked in a Democratic advantage on the NLRB. Her term is up next week. That was from The Hill. From USA Today, Capitol Police arrested a man Tuesday night and charged him with assaulting a government official after Congresswoman Nancy Mace reported that she had been accosted on the U.S. Capitol grounds. Police identified the suspect as James McIntyre, 33, of Illinois. Police said McIntyre was arrested after a member of Congress reported an incident in the Rayburn House office building, which was open to the public at the time. McIntyre went through security screening prior to entering the congressional buildings, police said. The police statement did not mention Mace by name, but the South Carolina Republican posted a message Tuesday night on X saying she had been assaulted. She wrote, "I was physically accosted tonight on Capitol grounds over my fight to protect women. Capitol Police have arrested him. All the violence and threats keep proving our point. Women deserve to be safe. Your threats will not stop my fight for women." House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries was asked about this at his weekly news conference.
Have you been briefed on the incident with Representative Mace yesterday? She wrote on Twitter, on X, that she was accosted by transgender rights activists. What do you make of that? And what do you make of the temperature right now in terms of potential threats?
I have not been briefed on the incident, but have made clear that members of Congress should be provided maximum protection as we move forward in this environment of intensifying political violence. No member of Congress should be accosted or assaulted or attacked based on their political beliefs. This is a democratic, free society. And the reports, at least, of the alleged assault and attack on Nancy Mace are very troubling, but I have not had the opportunity to speak directly with her.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the minority leader, at his news conference. There's an article out by the New Republic on this that reads, according to 3 eyewitnesses, James McIntyre simply shook the Congresswoman's hand during a reception following an event celebrating the anniversary of a child welfare law and asked Mace to protect the rights of transgender people. Other foster care advocates present at the reception disagreed with Mace's account. Elliot Hinkle, a consultant who has advised the federal government on issues affecting youth and foster care, said McIntyre shook her hand and made a comment about how many transgender youth are in foster care, adding, "They need your support." That was from the New Republic. U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger testified today before the Senate Rules and Administration Committee about reforms implemented to improve the Capitol Police after security issues of the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol in anticipation of Electoral College certification and presidential inauguration events next month. Chief Manger was also asked about security of individual senators and House members. Here are the questions from the committee's leadership. Chair Amy Klobuchar, Democrat of Minnesota, and Ranking Republican Deb Fischer of Nebraska.
I know you rely on partnerships with local law enforcement. Your testimony mentions the department's new Protective Intelligence Operations Center to enhance the department's ability to respond to threats. How do you expect the center to improve the investigation of threats when, as we know, so many of them are made away from the mothership of the Capitol?
So I just want to say for the record that our Protective Intelligence Operations Center, or the PIOC, is a work in progress. We've stood it up. It's doing a great job in terms of coordinating everything to making sure that when we get these threats that come in, that it gets the proper attention and the proper coordination with all of the department's resources. We want to make sure that we're working hand in hand with the Sergeant at Arms, and so that that we have, when you get 8,000 threats a year, you've got to triage them and determine which are the ones that require immediate attention and which, might not be as urgent. And so the PIOC helps us do all of that.
Very good. Thank you. Senator Fischer.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. Chief, just to follow up here on Chairman Klobuchar's question to you about the Protective Intelligence Operations Center. When we're looking at how members receive verified information of possible threats out there or actions that are taking place, I think it's really important to come from you, not from the media. Do we have a written policy on that, on how the communication goes out? I know we get alerts quite often on our text and on our email, but do we have a written policy on that?
We do, with our social media, where we put information out. When our public information office puts information out, we do have a policy about that, and there's always a balance in terms of what information that we want to put out. You don't want to harm an investigation, but at the same time, I think the public wants to know, especially if there's something that in and around this campus that might be a danger to other people. We want to make sure that we get information out. So there's a balance there.
U.S. Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger, questioned by Senator Deb Fischer, Republican of Nebraska, ranking member on the Rules Administration Committee. You also heard questions from the committee chair, Amy Klobuchar. And a story from Politico. Donald Trump is expected to be named Time Magazine's Person of the Year, and to celebrate the unveiling of the cover, the president-elect will ring the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange on Thursday morning. According to 3 people familiar with the plans, granted anonymity because they were not authorized to divulge the plans. Donald Trump was also named Time Person of the Year in 2016 after he won the presidential election, and he joined 13 other U.S. presidents who have received the recognition, including President Joe Biden. That from Politico. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. You can find all of C-SPAN's programs on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and at cspan.org. That's also where you can get this program as a podcast, and Washington Today is also on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, sign up for our daily email word for word at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.